this video, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Access reports. We're not going to be going too deeply into reports in this course, but we are going to be taking a look at the report wizard and the default report. If you haven't yet watched my video on queries in Microsoft Access, which should be the SQL and queries tutorial, do that now. That will help a little bit because we're going to be talking a little bit about queries in this video. So we have here is Microsoft Access, and this is our doctor's office example. So what reports are going to allow us to do is sort of make a printout template that we can use to generate reports. For example, your boss might want to see a report on all the patients in the office. So you'd want to create a report, so you could often just go to that report, have it generate a current list, and print it out for them. So let's take a look at the default report. So this is just basically telling Access, make a report for this table for us. So to do that, we click Create, make sure that we are on the patient table, like this, and click Report. So we're going to Create, and then we click just Report. This is going to create the basic default report. You can see here this popped up. I'm just going to move it a little bit so it's easier to see. It goes on for a little bit, and you can see that it lists all of the fields in our table here. And these little grid lines that you can see, they're little dots going up and those little dots going along the side. They basically tell you where the page is going to end. In this case, if we tried to print this report in portrait view, we're going to have a problem because it's going to go off the page a little bit. It would take two pages side by side to show this. If we wanted to see what that would look like, we can go into print view. So just like with forms, queries, and tables, we have different views that we can look at the report in. And one of those is print preview. So in print preview, we can see how it's actually going to print. And you can see it's cut off here because it's going on to the next page. And if we want to look at what the next page of the report is, we just click this navigation button down here. Instead of going to different records, it's going to be going to different pages of the report. You see on the next page, it's the other half that was cut off. So one of the things we might want to do is get this all onto one page. So we're going to get out of print view by just clicking Close Print View up here. Brings us back to the report view. And right now we are in what's called a layout view, which lets us make some changes to the report. If we're in report view, it sort of looks like a form, but we can't actually edit anything. So reports are just read-only. They just sort of display data. If we want to make changes, we have to either be in layout view or design view. Layout view is a little bit easier to deal with just because it lets us edit the report while we actually see the data from the report. Well, if we were in design view, it looks a little bit similar to the form design view. It doesn't actually show us the data, it shows us the different fields. We're going to take a closer look at this in a bit, but for now, we're going to head back out to layout view. Right now, what we want to do is we want to get rid of some of these fields because we don't really need them in our report. So for example, we might not want card number because card number might be considered private information or something that we shouldn't have on this report. So we're going to get rid of that. I'm going to go delete column. So got rid of that column. So now we have last name, we have first name. They're taking up a little bit of space. So maybe we want to resize these a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select both the header up here for last name and select all fields and just drag it to be a bit smaller. So choose the side of these based on the field size in your database. So if you had a really big field size, it's going to give it lots of space. If you had a really small field size, it's going to give it only a little bit of space. You do want to make sure it's going to have enough room for all the names. If you had like a really big report, that's going to be thousands of names. You might want to make sure that you're actually pulling it far enough to actually see all of them, or you're still getting cut off names eventually. So I'm going to make this one a bit smaller too. We have phone number here, a bit smaller. Got their address. Doctor ID, maybe we'll get rid of birth date because it's not too helpful. We'll delete that column. And we'll get rid of insured. Maybe we just want to have this basic report. And you can see that's also for us made a total. So it tells us the total of the accounts. That's one of the things it does by default. And you can see the doctor IDs are just a number. That's because it's only giving us the foreign key that's stored in this table. It's not sort of joining it with another table. You also see at the bottom here, we have the page 1 of 1. It's sort of off the page, so we're going to want to drag that back on. I'll put it right in the center down here. And you can see now that it's all on one page. If we were to take a look in the print view, you can see that we have a nice report. It's all on one page. And we have a little total for the account balances. Go to that. Now let's say we want to do some editing, make this look a little bit fancier. Well, we still have all those formatting tools that we saw before for reports, so we can always change things like color of text, can make it bold, change fonts, all the basic stuff you'd expect. You can have images, like a default one in here for us. You can insert new images, just like you did in your forms. You can put logos, dates, times, pretty much anything you could do in a form visually, you can do in a report. One thing we might want to do is all these boxes. Maybe we don't really like it how it looks like a bunch of cells in Excel. Instead, we just want it to be a list. We can highlight all of these. And then we're going to go to Format. We're going to say Shape Outline. And we're going to say, let's just make it transparent. We got rid of all those cells. Might look a little bit nicer that way. Also do things like we could change the background. Maybe we want it to nice light green instead. Pretty much any sort of kind of formatting you could do with your forms, you can also do that in these reports. Make this outline. Maybe we want to make that a little bit more space, we can see clearly, and we can make it a nice bold, and we'll give it a nice green color. And we can take a look at how this looks. So if there's too many patients to list, it would just go on to a next page, and it would just keep going. So we can take a look at the design view. That gives us a pretty much different view to actually create this. It gives you a sort of a better idea of what's going on here. So you have a report header, a page header, detail, a page footer, and a report footer. So the report header is going to be the header for the whole report. It's only done once at the very top of the report on the first page. Same idea for the report footer. It's only done once on the very last page. So in this case, we have this fancy thing that says patient with a little image, has the date and the time. And at the end, at the very end of the report, we have the sum. This is things that Access has set up for us by default. We also have a page header. So this is going to be the header for each individual page for a report. And it's going to put on different label names. So we have the different field names, like last name, first name, phone number, address, things like that, just so you know what everything is in the list. Details is actually the contents of the report. And this is actually going to be repeated once for each record in the table. So for each patient, it's going to repeat what we have in the details section. The page footer is going to be repeated on each page. So if we were to do something like add a little X here, like we could just use the line tool to draw an X, just as a demonstration to see how this is repeated. It's not going to print it once, it's actually going to print it once for every single patient. So if we take a look in the print view, we can see that we now have an X for every single patient. Anything you put in that detail section is going to be repeated for each patient. So if you change the formatting of one of those, it's going to change the formatting for all of them. We can remove that just for demonstration purposes. Let's go back to layout view. Personally, I like manipulating it in layout view just because you can see the results live. I think it makes it a little bit easier for reports. And the next thing we might want to do is we have this list of doctor IDs, but it's kind of cumbersome because you'd have to look up what doctor that actually is. If we actually wanted to give the real doctor, we could delete this column and we could add in a new field. The way we do that is we click on design, we click add existing fields, and right now we have a list of fields in the current patient table. So if we decided, oh, maybe we want to add insured back, we could drop it in there and we get insured back. But in this case, we want to bring in the doctor's name from another table. You would have to join it. So we don't have to worry about the SQL behind that. The report tool actually makes this quite easy. All we have to do is say show all tables. We go to doctor and we click on doctor's last name. In this case, we'll just show the doctor's last name for each patient. And we drop it in. And it's smart enough to figure out that there's a join between those two tables, because in the relationship tool, we defined a relationship. So that's why it's so important to set up those relationships properly in the relationship tool, because it'll make your life so much easier when you start making reports, forms, and queries, because a lot of it will be done for you. Let's close that. And now you can see we have the name of each patient's doctor. So these labels that it did by default are just sort of dumping in the field name. They're not always the best to look at. So we can just double click to make them look a little bit better. Change that to have a space. And you can see this one has the table name added because there's an ambiguity there. We have the last name for patient, we have last name for doctor. So I tried to add the table name just to make it clear, but we can just call this doctor. There we go. So now we have our first report. It looks pretty okay. This would be a okay report to list all the patients, who their doctor is, and I guess their account balance. So let's make that a little bit nicer too. There we go. So once you're done a report, you can just hit save. Call this something nice like patients. And you click OK. And you can see that it added a new section down here called reports, and it saved patients. So if we close this, we come back to it later, we can get the report again, print it again, view it again, make changes. But what's really nice is that if we make changes to the patient actual table, let's say this guy got a new phone number, that will just be all zeros. Save that. We come back to the report, and we're going to print it again. Let's go print view. Oops. We can see that it also updated Jack Doe in our report. So any changes to the table will happen in our report. So that's really useful. So if you had to make this report every month, you won't have to edit it again or set it up again. You just go to your report and click print. So you can click print right up there and it would actually print it to your printer. But you could also export this into other formats. We could make this a PDF button and save as PDF. Up for us, and we have a nice PDF report if we had to like email it to someone. And we could also even export this to Excel. So it's going to have a few different options like the type, but generally they're mostly set up okay. And it saved that to my documents. Let me open that. Let's take a second. Okay, here we go. So now we have a copy of the report in Excel. So it doesn't keep all the formatting, so it doesn't look quite as nice, but we have the actual data here. So if we wanted to do some sort of different formulas and things, we could do that. So that's pretty useful on its own, but we can make this report even more advanced. And we're going to do that by taking a look at the report wizard. Instead of just using the default report, we're going to try using something called the report wizard. And this time, you can see that we have patients and then they have a doctor here. Maybe we wanted to make this report a little bit differently. So instead, it's going to list patients by doctor. So we'll have like first, like maybe Dr. Wilson, who his patients are, then maybe Dr. Bloggs, who their patients are, and so on. And maybe we want sort of like subtotals. So we know how much the patients of Bloggs owe, patients of Smith owe, and so on. So that might sound complicated, but it's actually really easy to do with the report wizard. So we're going to exit out of this report. We're going to hit create. Instead of hitting report, which makes the default report, we're going to hit report wizard. So now, just like with the forms, it's asking us what table is this report going to be for. We're going to select table patient. Now it's asking us what fields we want to include in our report. So unlike the default report, it's not going to just dump everything into the report and make us delete things. Instead, it's going to ask us to start with what we want. So we're going to want last name, first name, phone number, address, and account balance. And now we also want that doctor's name. If we just put in doctor ID like this, it's just going to put the doctor ID, like the actual foreign key number, on our report, like it did when we first made that default report. We don't really want that. We want the actual doctor's name, and we can do that. We just go to change what table we're looking at, go up to doctor, and we're going to select doctor's last name. You can select fields from different tables. as long as they have a relationship that actually makes that possible. I'm going to go to next. And what it's asking you here is basically how do we want to group our data. So by patient would just be listing all the patients like we saw in the first example. If we say by doctor, it means it's going to list them by the doctor table. So for each doctor in the doctor table, it's going to give a report on their patients. So we might get like Dr. Smith, that's going to list the patients for Dr. Smith. We might get Dr. Bloggs, then it's going to list the patients for Dr. Blog. Just saying which table do we want to base this on. So we're basing it on doctor, so it's going to give a report for each doctor. And we're saying we're grouping it. Do we want to add any extra grouping levels? So if we did that, it would sort of make like even subgroupings. In this case, we don't really have something to subgroup it on. If we had like some sort of subgroup category, like maybe we had multiple patients by first name, and we want to put all the patients by first name together, or actually a better one would be by insurance. We could do that. Since we didn't select insurance, we're just going to do it this way. So we're going to say doctor for each doctor, and we're going to list the patients. But you are allowed to have even more levels of nesting. We're just going to have one level under doctor. So now it's going to ask us how do we want to sort the data in our report. So just like with some of the queries we've seen, how you could sort them in different ways, we could sort our report in different ways. So it's going to be first by doctor, but this is sort of asking what about after that? Well, we want to sort by patient name. But patient name consists of two fields, a last name and a first name. So we're going to say sort first on last name. If there's any ties, people have the same name, then sort by first name. Now it's going to ask us basically the layout or the template for the report. So there's no real correct one here. It's just sort of personal preference. I think outline is going to demonstrate it best, so I'm going to pick that. And we can also pick the orientation if we want a portrait page report or do we want a landscape. So we're going to leave it portrait. And then this last checkbox is asking us if we want it to just like go off the page, or do we want to try to squeeze everything onto one page. So I usually like unchecking this, just because when it tries to squeeze everything onto one page, it usually doesn't do a great job. It's usually better to do it by hand. I'm going to uncheck that, click next. Call this name of the report, doctors, patients. And it's asking if we want to preview the report right away or if we want to modify the report's design. So just like with forms, we could go right into the report, like we're using it, or we could go into designing it. So in this case, we're going to start with previewing the report. So you can see it looks a little bit different than last time. Now we actually have it listed by doctor, so they're sort of groupings. So this is the patients for Dr. Smith, this is the patients for Dr. Blog, this is the patients for Dr. Wilson, and so on. The one thing is we don't have all the information, like account balance, because that's being cut off and going on to the next page that we can see here. So we're going to have to tweak this a little bit. And also some of these labels aren't really the best. Like it says, doctor's dash last name, patient dash last name. We can probably improve that a little bit. Then we're going to close print preview. We're going to switch our view to layout view. And we're going to start just shrinking some things down just to make sure everything fits nicely. Like that. So right now I'm selecting both the actual values in these fields and the label at the same time. That just makes it easier to shrink them both. And you can move them both. If I only selected one, I could move them separately, like that. And I probably don't want to move them separately just because they won't be lined up anymore. I'm also going to edit these names a bit. I'll call this. Sure. And you can see, even though I'm editing it just at the top here, it is affecting all the other groupings. Because it's set once, and it affects all the other ones. So you don't have to edit it each time, which is nice. And it keeps everything very consistent. Let's move phone number over. Address over. And now account balance should fit. Okay, so now everything should be on one page. Oh, we have the footer down here. Okay, let's get that back over here. And that looks okay. Let's take a look in the view. Print view. There we go. Have it by doctor. and we have the account balances. Now we need to add in that sort of subtotal. So let's go back to the report. Now we're back to layout view, and we want to add in those totals. So I'm going to have account balance highlighted here. I'm going to go to totals and click sum. See, it added a sum down here. So 5 plus 35 is 40, so it's working there. And over here, it added a total sum of the whole page. So this sum up here is the sum for this group, and this one's for the whole page. So it added the numbers, but it doesn't look super nice. So we might want to move it around a little bit. Maybe make it a different color, bold, red. We'll also format the overall total. Make it a bigger size. Or maybe not quite that big. And we'll make it a different color and bold. Now we might want to add some labels just to make it more clear what these numbers are. And we can do that most easy in design view. So you can see now that there's these sort of sum equals sum lines. These would be our totals. And now design view looks a little more complex because we have these groupings. So now in addition to the headers, we also have a grouping header, so the doctor ID header. So this would be the header that's printed for each doctor. And we have a footer that's printed for each doctor. These details in here would be the detail of each patient inside each doctor grouping. So we can see in the doctor footer, we have that subtotal, and in the overall report footer, we have the overall total. So if we want to add sort of a label to go with these, we could do it right here. Total. And we could add the second one right here. And we could call this just and we can move them around a little bit. But I want to switch to layout view just because I find it a bit easier to see how it should be laid out when we can actually see everything. And you can see doctor totals here and totals down here. So I'm going to drag it over a little bit. Format it a bit. Bold. Red just to map the same color maybe. Take 2. Bold and green. And we'll remove the bold from there. And you could do a lot of sort of fiddling around with it just to get everything exactly where you wanted. Details aren't too important in terms of how you make the form, but in real life you'd want to make your form looking nice, so you'd want to spend a little bit of time messing around with it. But the nice thing is you only have to do that once, and then you have that sort of report template that you can just click and have a new one generated whenever you need. Let's take a look at how this looks in the print preview. Now we have a total for each doctor. We have an overall total. I could still make this look a little bit better. It's cutting off the address. Let's take a look at that. Off because this is too wide, so we'll make that smaller because none of our balances are that high. And we could use a space here. We could make everything a little bit more fancy. We could make this a different font. Nice. One thing we might want to do is add an image. So we can do that in the design view. Design, we are going to image. I have this one ready to go. If you didn't have one already selected, that's just showing a list of previous used images. You could go to Browse and find an image on your computer. One right here. And if you wanted to make it transparent, and assuming the image actually had transparent background, you just go to Format, Shape Outline, Transparent. And we want Transparent Fill. So we could add more text to this header. Should be familiar with this sort of process from when you made forms. Better color. And let's switch back. And we can see we have a sort of nice looking report of all the patients and their totals. So I'm going to save this. Closed. Where this can become even more powerful is when we combine it with queries that we saw in that other video for this week. So I'm going to quickly just make a query. If you're not sure what I'm doing, make sure you watch the SQL and query video. So we want to make a query that's going to match up all the patients with their last checkup date, give a list of patients that are in need of a checkup. I go into the query design. I want to add doctor because we're going to want the doctor name. We're going to add last checkup because we need the last checkup date. And we're going to add patients. In this report, we're going to list the patient's last name, patient's first name. We're also going to want the doctor's last name. And we're going to want the checkup date. And we want to make sure that checkup date was not in 2020. So we want to get that list of patients that were in 2020, just because we want to maybe call them and let them know they're due for a checkup. So since we want to call them, we should also add a phone number. And we're going to want to move where phone number is. So I want checkup date to be last. So doctor. And if we test this query, we can see that we're getting patients, we're getting phone number, we're getting the doctor, and we're getting the checkup date, and it's only listing people that haven't had a checkup this year. We're going to go back to the design view, and we're just going to want to make sure it sorts. I say sort on last name, and then sort on first name. Again, it should be sorted by the patient's name, so that looks good. So now, if we wanted to use this for a report, we first save it. Call it need checkup. So this is the query. It's going to be called need checkup. And if we want to make a report out of it, we go create and we click report. Now this is the need checkup report. We use the default report generator, and it basically made a report based on our query. So we could do things like just make it a little bit nicer. We could add these names. First name. And the checkup date. Last checkup date. Just try to get everything on one page. Okay, and I don't really like the cell sort of look with the borders, so I'm going to get rid of that. Format, shape outline, transparent. And I don't know why it's giving us a total. Okay, so let's take a look in the print preview. Now we've turned that query that we made into an actual report. So this report will use that query and it will give us a list. So we could run that every month, and then we could have that list of people for the doctor's secretary to call to tell them that they're due for a checkup. So one thing we might want to improve on this is these phone numbers are formatted too nicely. They're all sort of just clumped together. So we could sort of mess with the table and try to change the input mask on that, but we could also do it on a report level. So to do that, you click on the field you want to change, and we click on property sheet. So just like with the form where everything had a property or a property sheet, same thing's true for reports, and we can edit those. We can see under data over here, it has input mask. So we can add an input mask for a phone number. Could be bracket 000. So zeros represent it has to have a number here. bracket, I'm using the slash in front of the brackets to say the literal bracket character. Do a slash in front of the white space to say I want a literal space. Saying 0, 0, 0 again to say I want 3 numbers, any numbers, but they have to be provided. And I'm going to do a slash and then a dash just to say I want a literal dash character here. And then 4 zeros, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's an input mask for a phone number. And you can see all the phone numbers just changed their format. So I did type this out by hand, and after I typed it out, Access changed it a little bit just to make it look nicer. But you should understand input masks, because that is going to be a section on the final exam. You can always just, when you're doing it in real life, select this little tool here, and it'll give you a few different input masks that are built in, and those cover most of the use cases you'll find in real life. But it is important you understand them, because for example, if I just select phone number, go through, finish, it works fine, but it actually has a slightly different meaning. So it looks somewhat similar, but now we have like 9s in front. So this is actually an input mask that says the area code is optional. So there are slight differences, and if you don't really understand what you're doing with input masks, it's going to be really hard to debug and understand when things go wrong. So make sure that you understand those input masks and format codes. So we can take a look at that in the print view again. And you can see we have our nice list here, and we could even like turn it into a PDF. And we could email this to someone to then call all these patients and let them know that they are in need of a checkup. And you could do this with any query and any table. So it is a quite powerful way of creating reports. Now, there are other ways to create reports, like we just covered the query wizard and the default report. You're also capable of sort of doing it from scratch yourself. Let's see properly. And you would do that by going create, and then you could do a blank report or just a report design. And that's going to just create a blank report and then let you sort of either fill it in using the design mode, or you could do it in layout mode even. Then you would have to manually go in and add every field you want. You'd have to figure out what table you're going for first. Maybe you want to report on doctors. You'd have to drop in like the doctor name, last name, first name, practice. So right now I'm just sort of dropping them in, so it's putting them more in a tabular view. For this course, I really only expect you to be able to do it with the wizard, understand what reports are and why they're useful. So thank you for watching, and have a great day.